Welcome back to that time of the week, your favorite show, Mastering Thought with Mark Waller and Christina Black. Merry Christmas, Mark.
Merry Christmas. You know, people people will wonder 5 years from now what Christmas this was. So
True, 2023.
there you go. So this is a special program today, and Christina's the star of the show.
Oh.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but I had it's funny because I'm interacting with my clients all week long,
Mm-hmm.
and the marriage counseling or individual therapy, whatever it is, and they keep watching the videos and asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I got this week was, can you do another episode to follow up with Kristina and talk more about the awakening that
Yeah.
she went through, especially from the perspective of 2 weeks later?
Yeah.
And so I've
It's
got some
it's
probing
been good.
questions, but I want you to kind of start off on where you're at with this whole process.
Yeah. When I had first had my awakening, maybe within a couple hours, it occurred to me like, oh, I should tell Mark. So I told you. I texted you. And then you had said, well, let's record, or like you should record what happened so that well, all the details are fresh. And so I had done a voice memo about it. And then I'm just filling everybody else who's listening and obviously Mark, you know what we said, but then you said, no, I meant like a show. So we did a recording of that. And I know that I definitely talked about some of the major themes, but it was cool. Yesterday, I listened to the voice memo again in preparation for today. And it was interesting how, like, yes, I remembered most of the thoughts that I had, but my tone looking back was being like maybe a little um like I had a bad taste in my mouth for what the ego did to me, and like
I
how
remember
it
that.
had manipulated me. But when I listened to the voice memo, yeah, I mentioned that, but I was more grateful for how free I felt from my ego. I felt free from my captor. And and that was really the theme of the whole voice memo. And so I was like, oh, I need to regain that gratitude, I think, because um, I would just rather remember how free I am than how trapped I was, I guess. I
So,
don't know.
so I've got some probing questions I want to ask about this because I have kind of an
Okay.
ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Because the process that, and by the way, I just want to say this because we were just discussing this before we came on. This, as far as I know, nobody has ever done this on YouTube before. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
taken somebody through the process and
Right.
gotten a result like this.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
if you're wondering about this, I would go back. The thing to do when you go to our channel on YouTube, just click video, and it sorts everything in chronological order. And so
Mm-hmm.
just go back over the last, 3 or 4 videos and you can watch Christina's process as she goes
Oh.
through the instructions. And I think it's absolutely fascinating. I've never seen anything like this
Hmm.
at all. And let me just address one other thing before we get further into this. What Christina experienced is not enlightenment, it's an awakening. And we'll cover enlightenment some other time, but this definitely is a shift in consciousness that
Mm-hmm.
happens when somebody disidentifies from the voice in their heads. So there is another step. This is a first
Yeah.
step, and if you go study, the literature on mystical awakenings, this is definitely a first step in the process. So anyway,
Okay.
so I want to take you back several weeks ago when we first started talking about the voice in your head was not you and doing thought watching. What was your thought?
Mm-hmm.
What was your reaction to that whole philosophy at that time?
I was pretty open-minded to it, partially because partially because of just hearing you talk about patients that you walked through it, but then also having like my husband at home who went through it with you in therapy with you, and it was a very bonding moment actually. When I realized and I had my awakening, and so I don't know, it was just cool to hear his thoughts too as I was going through the beginning stages. He was very encouraging, like, "Oh yeah, makes me want to do it. You should keep doing it," you know? So,
So I had some interference on my end, and I hope we didn't lose what you were talking about. Can you just back up and start with the bonding moment? I think we might have
oh yeah.
been interfered with, but if we weren't, it'll be fine.
Yeah, just saying I was open-minded and it was nice that my husband was open to it as well since he'd been through it. And so it was kind of a bonding, no, it was a bonding conversation when we were talking about what the awakening felt like or what the steps of thought watching were. So yeah, it was good.
But I remember several weeks ago when we started the process, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to take you through the process now." You
Yeah.
had a moment of anxiety about it. Can you remind me
Oh
what
yeah.
that was?
Well, I just wasn't sure. I guess I just kept thinking I was going to do it wrong,
Right.
and that was what was making me nervous. And then that's when we did two episodes on what not to do with thought watching, and those were helpful and clarifying. So,
So it's very interesting that when we started through the process, your first thought was that you weren't going to do it right.
oh yeah, that can be with me a lot of times.
Right. And I run into
Yeah.
that a lot, by the way.
Uh-huh.
So one of the first people I ever trained in this many years ago, he was actually a marriage family therapist, and I used to say, Raymond, watch for the next thought, and the first thought that would go through his mind was, I'm not going to do this right.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day he
You're
realized,
like,
wait
you
a minute,
got
that
it.
was the first thought.
Yeah, for sure.
All
For
right,
sure.
so when you started it, you were anxious that you weren't going to do it right.
Yeah, definitely some of the time. Like I had a willingness to still try.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
when did you wrap your head around how easy this was and you just started doing it? How long did that take?
Probably about 2 or 3 weeks. Especially the episode we did with the mansion on the rocks.
Oh,
That that really helped me because you mentioning that it's not about tearing down each of the room in the mansion, which would represent the different parts of your mind and things you think about, but that instead you're just pushing the house that's on top of the round rock so that you change your entire relationship to all thought, not you're just fixing
right.
up a room here and there.
If I was more facile with this software, I'd bring that picture up. I'm not sure I know how to do it. But basically, the picture was of this structure of many houses all bolted together, but it came down and it was all sitting on a little rock.
Mhm.
And the idea of the metaphor was that when people think about the thought watching, they think they have to go deconstruct that whole gigantic world of thinking that we built over the
Mhm.
years.
All the
And that's not
corridors,
true.
right?
And so those of you who want to go back and look at that, I thought it was pretty clever. That was generated by AI, by the way.
Yeah,
That,
so cool.
so so when you realized you didn't have to do that, then did it become simple?
Yeah, my brain stopped trying to make it more complicated. It was like, okay, it really is that simple. Doing it that way is doing it right. We'll just let ourselves do that now.
And so just to describe that, all you're doing is a couple, three times throughout the day, you just notice that you're thinking, and the instant you notice it, it goes away.
Yeah,
Okay, so
right.
take us to the day before this transformation happen? I assume you were doing the exercise and going about your,
Hmm.
business and, being a mom and all that other stuff, but you were doing the exercise, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you can find a minute here or there just to, you know,
Sure.
get it done, and so it's not hard to fit in between things. But I would usually like go to a different room and close the
Oh.
door because, like I've mentioned before on the show, my kids are very chatty, and just my presence inspires them to talk so much.
Uh,
But
that's good because the age your kids are at, usually they clam up and go shut themselves away in their rooms.
I know my daughter's like just starting to like verge into teenagerhood, and actually, I would say that the thought watching and awakening in general has quieted my mind, and a lot of like some of the other tools that you have shared too, just about tying tying your like whatever's making you spiral now back to what early
Oh,
childhood experiences you had. And anyway,
right.
anyway, my brain's just been a lot clearer of a place. And I definitely think it's been helping my relationship with my kids. So
Okay.
that's
Perfect.
been great.
So you're less emotionally reactive with them.
Yeah, like not only am I not feeling the emotions as strongly, but I'm also able to sometimes interrupt the downward spiral that could have happened. Even if it was
Okay.
just, well, now I'm annoyed, even
Right,
if it was
right.
just preventing that. Um, but really, I think it's just given me a lot more freedom to be happy and make a nicer place to be around. So,
So I'm going to get back to that point there because there's something very special. But before we do that, so the day before this event happened, you were just you go into your room and just randomly see, check out a thought or two and watch it go away.
yes, exactly.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so take me to the next morning. What
Yeah.
happened?
So, the next morning, I was sitting down, and that was when my husband and I started talking something, and I was trying to explain where I was coming from with like, how would I put it? Um, I had like a reasons for doing a couple things, and he was just asking me to explain what the reasons were. And as I was explaining them, that's when I realized like whoever's using my mouth right now, it sure doesn't feel like me. I don't believe the stuff I just said, even though the thing or part of my mind that used it, it did believe it. But I don't feel like I'm one with that part of, that part of me or whatever you'd want to say. I don't feel one with whatever that thing is. And so, and what was interesting, because it was a little bit of an emotional conversation, because I've kind of felt like, Um, okay, kind of going back to my wiring, how it was like, oh, I probably did that wrong. So let me explain what I did to him so that
Okay.
he can understand what my intentions were. And then that's when I realized like I even wanted to right in the moment. I had a moment where I was like, oh, I should do thought watching right now. And I was like, no, I should wait because this is clearly emotional. And then that's when I was like, this doesn't feel like me. And then boom, like the paradigm shifted. And it was like, you're right. Like this whole character that's been in your head does
Okay.
not need to be in control. And that's when I saw like the way it had affected my life, and really since the beginning. So I
Wow.
hadn't known there was another way to live. And that's when I started to feel free from the caring if people liked me just for the sake of it, caring about putting so much effort into doing that. I've definitely had better energy since the awakening, and I think it's because this thing was taking up so much of my brain
Right,
activity all day.
right, right.
And
You have to prop
yeah,
it up all the time.
yeah, and it takes a lot of work to work that machine.
Right.
Yeah, so that, and then also just like freedom to be more authentically myself because it's okay if people, it's one thing if I'm like doing something offensive and being rude, like, yeah, that matters. But if I'm just being who I am and I'm not doing anything like wrong, it's okay with me if I'm who I am and that doesn't, I'm not your cup of tea, like, that's fine. Go find another
So
cup of tea. I don't feel worse because of it.
so let me just interrupt you there. So
Yeah.
basically what I'm hearing you say is you dropped the need for approval.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. For sure. And just like my head is, I wish there was something I could wear that would count my thoughts before and after, because I would guess that it's, you know, like there's a lot fewer thoughts. I couldn't guess how much, but
So let
I don't
me
know. At least a
okay.
third fewer thoughts.
So let me make some comments about what you've said about the process. So let me ask you a question though. In that moment when you saw your ego and what it was
Yeah.
up to, did it
Yeah.
feel like you were outside of yourself or that it was outside of you?
I guess after, because you asked me that question before, but I guess I would say it doesn't feel like the authentic me, but it did feel like we were in the same room together, if my head's the room.
So, but was it out of you or were you out of yourself when the moment you made that observation?
I don't know. My gut's telling me to say it was out of me, but I don't really
So,
know.
so it's like the ego was over there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, fair, because that was kind of like when I said we were in the room together,
Right.
it was like in my head there was a little like party and I was thinking, I wish you would just leave to the ego. You
So,
should just leave this party.
so let me just kind of describe from my point of view
Okay.
what happens when leading up to that. So first of all, you're doing the thought watching, and when you do the thought watching, the voice in your head speaks. You activate the prefrontal cortex to become the observer.
Right.
So you're literally rewiring the front of the brain. And the
Hmm.
feeling that something is outside of you, then you're looking at it, it comes from being in this part of the brain.
Oh, okay.
So so you know that you've activated the prefrontal cortex because you either feel outside of yourself or the thing you're looking at feels like it's outside of you. There's
Hmm.
this separation that has occurred. And so my theory is, and I believe this to be true, is the thought watching prepared for that event to happen.
Mm.
Because you were
Hmm.
already creating the separation through the practice.
Right.
And then in the moment, in the middle of the circumstance, the separation became complete and you were able to
Right.
see what you saw.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. Now, the other thing I
Yeah.
want to I want to make about that is, and I don't generally tell this to people when I'm training them because then
Hmm.
they'll start looking for it, but
Hmm.
I use the metaphor of a bonfire. What does a bonfire need? It needs fuel, right?
Right.
Okay, so when the ego dies and you see it for what it is, you don't give it any fuel anymore.
Hmm.
So what happens is your head gets really quiet after that.
Hmm.
And I don't typically tell people that because then they're looking for it. They do the thought watching and then they're like, okay, it's supposed to get quiet.
When's it going to get quiet around here? I'm really waiting for it to get quiet.
Right, right. And so that which completely screws up the practice.
Yeah.
So, but after this shift occurs, and people complain, when they first start the thought watching, they tell me how busy their head is.
Hmm.
Well, after this breakthrough, your head's not busy anymore.
Yeah.
And where are you, if your head's not busy anymore, what are you actually experiencing?
Well, myself and quiet.
The present, you're experiencing presence, the present moment.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, for those of you who have been devotees who are listening to being present, which is extremely important, there's no way to become present. But what you can do is see what your mind is doing instead of being present. In the instant you notice it, it stops and you're present.
Mm-hmm.
So when you stop identifying with thought, your mind gets very quiet and you experience an enormous amount of presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay,
can
so
tell.
go ahead.
I
I'm
can
sorry.
tell that. Oh, that's okay. I can tell that the amount more of eye contact I've made with the members of my family this week has been noticeable to me and nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Instead of being in your head rehearsing what you're going to say, you're actually making one-on-one connection.
Right.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what else have you noticed? Anything else that you've noticed that has changed?
I am getting better sleep and I'm able to wake up earlier
Okay.
now. And
Okay.
typically I was kind of useless to get out of bed until like 8 a.m. And now like I'm waking up at 6:30 every day and feeling fine and not being tired in the afternoon really. Like I'm
Okay.
still not tired in the afternoon. So that amount of time back is pretty good. I mean, that's a lot of hours a week to be
And why do
able
you
to
think you're
do
sleeping
more.
better?
I just think I feel more peaceful. Like in general,
Okay.
I just feel more peaceful.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not running the game of like looking for approval.
So when your husband Brett realized that you had had this same experience that he had had, was there just like this knowing between the two of you? Okay, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, "Oh, I think you're having your awakening." And I was like, "Oh, I think you're right." And then it was a funny time. And I'll see this in my clients because with my work in craniosacral therapy, like that changes which state of consciousness you're in.
Right.
So, and so like I see it all the time and it is a little bit disorienting. So like after I do, or, after I have craniosacral done on me, or even if I'm doing it, it's like your brain's a little bit slower to finish whatever thought it's doing. And like, oh man, if people are like, hey, I want to add a gift certificate and I'd like to buy a bottle of muscle rub and I want to pay for the service all in one ticket, I'm like, I'm gonna have to use my phone for this because my brain can't add right now. So I was definitely feeling that way when we were sitting on the bed talking about the awakening. He was really patient. I think he kind of got that, and he would ask me questions, but I was still kind of like figuring out
What had
all the
happened?
things that were in my consciousness
Right.
now. Yeah. So it was a little bit slower, but he was real pumped for me. Like he was just like,
Right.
"That's so awesome! I remember when that happened to me." And yeah, just like how much nicer he thought it was. But he didn't know there was a step two. He's like, either that's new since me, or I didn't get there. It's like, well, I'll figure out what step two is. We can do this together.
Well, now you know what step two is.
Yeah, just realizing when something feels other than you, right?
It's step two in my parlance. Step two is when you have an emotional reaction to tie it back to your childhood.
Oh, okay. So that's after the awakening.
Right, because it's so much more difficult before the awakening.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're in a dark room with your ego running the show, and you've got some therapist saying, now go back to your childhood and see how all this works.
Yeah.
With the thought watching, it's like turning on a light. All of a sudden, now the light's on, and I had a good example of this. I had a client a number of years ago, and she had this massive awakening. Really, worked hard, and so she comes into me the next week. This was when I was still seeing people in person, and she says, "Okay, I have a question. why do I get depressed every afternoon at about 4 o'clock? And now she's awake. She has this shift in consciousness. And I look at her and said, well, when you were a little girl, what happened every afternoon at 4 o'clock? And her eyes got big and she said, oh my God, my dad would come home. He was always in a bad mood. And it's like, boom, right there. She made the connection. She would have never made that connection that fast had she not had the breakthrough first.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay, I'm done with that then. All right, moving on.
Yeah.
You know,
That was
and
simple.
and people ask me, okay, well, now if I do the thought watching, what am I going to do to solve this problem?
Right.
And it's hard to explain, but when this change happens, the problem's no longer the problem. You look at it and you realize, oh, I'm creating the problem in my head here, and I'm not in my head anymore, so there's no problem.
Yeah. That's so cool.
So step 2 is to tie your current emotional reaction back to your limbic system, which is a little kid who was raised, and wired up by the time you're 5 years of age.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
did that. You did that a couple sessions ago, and your eyes got big when you saw the relationship. I remember
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. For sure. And it's been good to, I think that me thinking I'm going to do everything wrong ties into that too.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So that's a good one. If I need to do any more work after just realizing it now, then I can.
So the point is, for you, as I recall our recording several weeks ago, this I'm afraid I'm going to do everything wrong because I'm not good enough thing started the moment your kids would walk in and you would wake up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who wants to live in that hell?
No, not me.
So you don't have to live in that anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
But this is true for all of us. It doesn't matter whether you've got anxiety or depression or a relationship problem or whatever. The seed of that has been planted in those early childhood experiences, and we're so used to having them in our lives, we struggle with them all the time, but we don't realize they're there.
Yeah, for sure. You just accept them and
Yeah, you just think, oh, that's just the way I am.
hmm
And when people break free of their thoughts like you have, then all of a sudden they're free of the whole ball of wax.
hmm
So it's really cool to watch. It happens very quickly. And, in the meantime, I'm on the internet watching these, psychologists go through these excruciatingly long processes with people. And I just want to say, wait, no, wait.
You can make it easy.
Yeah, it's very easy.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
whether you have, and this is a good point to make, whether you have procrastination issues,
Oh, I do.
whether you have, because there's a lot of passive reactivity that doesn't look like it's a reaction. Procrastination is a reaction. You
Yeah,
know,
right.
not connecting emotionally with people around you, that's another reaction. Getting angry, getting jealous, being insecure, you know, anxiety, social anxiety. We can run down the whole list. It all comes from early childhood emotional learning.
Mm-hmm.
And this process is the key to unlocking that whole prison.
Mm-hmm.
All of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready.
Well, you don't need to be ready. You're already there.
Well, I just mean about step two.
Oh,
Just taking the moments where I'm not at my best and then like realizing what what it relates to and then being done with it.
right. So step 2, the way I like to explain this to people is when we have emotional reactions, we want to get away from the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of doing that, what I'd like you to think about is the reaction's like a phone ringing. So what do you do when the phone rings? You pick it up and answer it.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening when you have a reaction is the limbic system is calling you on the phone and saying, "Here's a dose of really rotten feelings. Will you answer the phone, please?"
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so you just answer the phone and say, "Okay, I have this feeling now. What is the message here? What is this related
Mm-hmm.
to?"
Mm-hmm.
Because our day-to-day emotional reactions are the little kid inside of us trying to get in touch with us, saying, wait a minute, there's a problem here. I need your attention.
Mm-hmm.
You're not getting enough approval, or, your husband likes somebody else better than you, or, whatever. And then you
Yeah.
look at it and realize, oh, that has an analog in my childhood. I can see what that is. Mom always
Mm-hmm.
liked my brother more than me. And now
Mm-hmm.
that feeling is coming up, and I've assigned it to my husband, and no, it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
None of it's real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, so do you have anything else to say about your awakening before we end today?
Mm. The other thing I would add to it was it kind of brought me to the next stage of what my body's working on, healing. And I have on the left side of myself some tension in my head and neck, and then also kind of down, I guess down by between my belly button and side on the left. And they're kind of paired up to each other.
Hmm.
And I had, after the awakening, I realized you actually had mentioned it in your list, but I was holding back people's full love from me. Like if they would like be loving to me, I would in my head like separate myself from that message meaning too much to me because I think that if it ever changed, that would be too hard
Oh,
to
you're
deal with.
protecting yourself.
Yeah, and so then, and I just had that realization. We were just hanging out outside, and I realized that, and I was like, oh, I don't have a use for that anymore. That is not something I want
Wow.
anymore. But I could tell it. I could tell which childhood memory it went back to, and
Wow.
more of a theme than like one day. But
Right,
I was
right,
like, well, if they wouldn't love me right, then I don't want to let anyone else love me because they're not going to love me right either. And I
right.
realized that's not true or fair.
Perfect.
And so then I've noticed with my husband and daughter in particular that like I've been a lot more open to their love and a lot more willing to give it back. So,
Wow. That's
yeah.
huge. That's
Yeah,
huge.
and along with that, actually my cheekbone started to pop out a little bit. Like I have
Really?
like they're compressed. Yeah, and it has to do with the emotional side of things.
Hmm.
And this is a lot what I deal with at work is helping
Right
people get
side.
the emotions to stop grabbing and holding down on their body. And so I was very pleased, but it definitely like brought my cheek out a little bit and the occiput like sort of resettled and the way my head relates to my C1 like sorted itself out. And then with that, the tension in my left side kind of responded and loosened up and my hip did a thing. But I was just like so thrilled because who doesn't want to be more comfortable in their
Of
body?
course. That makes
And
so much sense.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and left side has to do with like female relationships, damage in female relationships, and the right side has to do with damage in important male relationships. And
Okay.
because I'm a female, I can have tension on my left side just because I have a bad relationship with myself.
Okay.
And so that's been my personal health goal with myself is over the last few years is just like, okay, find the things and pull them, uproot them when you find them and it's even been easier since the awakening, I would say, because it was a pretty profound shift. Like I heard cracking in my ears because my
Really?
headphones were moving. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's so cool. If you've never tried craniosacral therapy, go find someone by you and try it because it is such a trip to feel whole nerves, bones, um, fascia, muscles just like completely reorganize themselves in your body to be what is going to bring you the most health and ability to thrive.
Well, I did it once. I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah,
But
so good.
but before we leave this topic, you said something I thought was very important, and that is when I'm talking about emotional reactions relating to childhood, I'm talking about childhood patterns and emotional learning, not trauma.
Oh,
And so So what you said when you were relating that insight you had was it didn't relate to an event. It
Yeah.
related to a pattern.
Hmm.
And that's a key concept because people are looking for an event and that there's usually no event there. It's a pattern of relating.
Oh, I see.
And that's what,
Yeah.
it's not an event. It's a pattern.
Yeah.
So people often assume I'm talking about some trauma. And they'll say, well, I wasn't traumatized. I don't remember anything. No, it's an interaction that occurred over a period of time that kind
Hmm.
of laid the predicate for this.
Hmm.
And if you just ask the question, you'll see what it is.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think this has been really special. So
Me too.
there's
It's
a
been
couple
my
other things
favorite
that
awakening.
no, you really articulated it very clearly. I thought it was hopefully people will be inspired, and that leads to my next topic. I really want to issue an invitation to anybody who's watching this to come on with us, or at least to come on YouTube and dialogue a little bit in the comments. And because we don't want to, leave anybody out who might be interested in getting a little more participation with some of
Hmm.
these principles. So feel free to comment and give us a way to reach out to you, and we'll contact you and just consider coming on and have a conversation with us.
Oh
The other
yeah. You don't
thing,
have to share anything you don't want to, just the stuff you want to.
no, and the other point is this is not therapy. What we're doing is not psychotherapy. This could help with your psychotherapy. It certainly help you get better plugged in. But we're not trying to do that. We're just using kind of a roadmap here and see what fits into the roadmap.
Hmm. For
Okay.
sure.
Do you have any
Yeah.
comments on that, Kristina?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Next thing I want to talk about before we go are my books. And finally, and this is, my shameless promotion. They're all on Amazon. You can find them. The links to the books are in the comment in the description. And I'm here to announce that The Dance of the Lion and Unicorn is now an Audible book.
I made my dog bark. She's so happy for you.
So, so it's now available on Audible, and in a few
Nice.
days it'll be on the other platforms like what's the iPhone platform?
Uh, iTunes? No, podcast.
iTunes.
Probably, or no,
iTunes.
no. Books?
It'll
Is it
be
on
on
books?
iTunes
Okay.
as a
iTunes.
podcast. Anyway, and Martin Landry, who did the production, did a great job, and he enjoyed the book. And there was a couple times where he burst out
Yeah.
laughing, and he had to go back and re-record the section. And so I don't know if you remember Armando,
That's
but
funny.
Armando comes and he's having difficulty with his wife, and I told him, remember, the most important erogenous zone in a woman is right here. And
Hmm.
he says, so I should kiss her on the forehead? That's literally what he said. And then we
Yeah,
were
maybe
having
not hurt. You might activate it a little more. I don't know. I don't know how that works.
we were having group meetings after that, and the person, Armando's obviously not his name, would come to the meetings, and we were talking about the book, and he would say, yeah, I'm Armando.
That
he
was me.
didn't he didn't mean to be so obtuse, but he sure, it was pretty funny.
That's cute.
All
Uh,
right, until we meet
well, thank you.
again.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Thank you, everyone who's tuning in. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out.
All righty, bye bye.
See ya.